In the heart of London, amidst the grandeur of Buckingham Palace, a scene unfolded that would soon capture the attention of everyone nearby. It was a typical summer afternoon, with tourists bustling around, snapping photos and marveling at the iconic red-uniformed royal guards standing tall in their ceremonial posts. Among the crowd was Alex, an American traveler with a reputation for being outspoken and bold. He had a knack for making his presence known wherever he went, and today was no exception. Alex's loud laugh cut through the chatter of the crowd as he adjusted the sunglasses perched on his nose. His backpack slung casually over one shoulder, he looked every bit the stereotypical tourist, except for the mischievous glint in his eyes. While most visitors were content to admire the palace's architecture or watch the changing of the guard ceremony, Alex had something else in mind. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small American flag, its stars and stripes fluttering slightly in the breeze. At first, no one paid much attention. Flags weren't uncommon among tourists. Many waved them proudly as symbols of national pride. But Alex wasn't waving it proudly. He was waving it provocatively. With exaggerated motions, he began marching back and forth near one of the royal guards stationed outside the palace gates. The guard stood perfectly still, his posture unwavering despite Alex's antics. His face remained expressionless, betraying no hint of irritation or amusement. "Hey there, Mr. Guard," Alex called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Ever seen this before? It's called freedom. Maybe you should try it sometime." Some onlookers chuckled nervously, while others exchanged disapproving glances. A few people even whispered comments like, "Who does he think he is? And this isn't going to end well." But Alex didn't care. If anything, the lack of reaction from the guard only encouraged him. He moved closer, practically shoving the flag into the guard's field of vision. "Come on, buddy," he teased. "Don't you have anything to say? Or are you just some fancy statue pretending to be human?" Despite Alex's taunts, the guard didn't budge. Not a muscle twitched. It was as if Alex were invisible, completely ignored. This infuriated him even more. Determined to get a reaction, he raised his voice louder. "You call yourselves protectors of tradition. All I see is someone too afraid to stand up for themselves." His words echoed across the courtyard, drawing even more eyes toward the spectacle. Tourists gathered in growing numbers, forming a loose circle around Alex and the guard. Cameras clicked furiously as people captured the bizarre confrontation. Some found humor in the situation, while others cringed at the blatant disrespect. A young couple holding hands looked uncomfortable, unsure whether to stay and watch or walk away. Nearby, a vendor selling souvenirs paused mid-transaction, his mouth slightly agape as he observed the unfolding drama. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the air became almost tangible. Would the guard finally break his silence? Would security step in to defuse the situation? Or would Alex push things even further, risking arrest or worse? No one knew what would happen next, but one thing was certain. All eyes were now on the unlikely showdown between a brash American tourist and a symbol of British tradition. As Alex continued his taunting performance, the crowd grew larger and more restless. Some tourists recorded the scene on their phones, while others whispered among themselves, debating whether this was entertainment or sheer rudeness. Despite the growing attention, the royal guard remained as still as a statue, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Not a single blink betrayed any sign of irritation or even acknowledgement of Alex's antics. Alex, however, wasn't ready to give up. He stepped even closer, practically standing toe-to-toe with the guard now. "Come on, man," he shouted, waving the American flag wildly in front of the guard's face. "You're telling me nothing I'm doing is bothering you?" Not even a little bit. The guard's silence only seemed to fuel Alex's frustration. His movements became more exaggerated, his voice louder, as if trying to provoke some kind of reaction. Any reaction at all. The tension in the air was palpable. A group of elderly British visitors nearby shook their heads disapprovingly. One woman muttered under her breath, "This is disgraceful," while another added, "He has no respect." Meanwhile, younger onlookers were divided. Some laughed nervously, finding humor in the absurdity of the situation, while others looked genuinely uncomfortable. Security personnel stationed around the palace began to take notice. Two uniformed officers exchanged glances before subtly moving closer to the commotion. They weren't close enough to intervene yet, but it was clear they were prepared to step in if things escalated further. Their presence didn't go unnoticed by the crowd, adding another layer of suspense to the unfolding drama. Despite the mounting pressure, the royal guard showed no signs of breaking his composure. His rigid stance and unwavering focus made him appear almost otherworldly, like a figure carved from stone rather than flesh and blood. It was as though he existed in a world of his own, completely detached from the chaos swirling around him. This stoic display only infuriated Alex further. "You think you're so tough, huh?" Alex sneered, leaning in dangerously close, standing there acting like you're better than everyone else. "Well, let me tell you something. You're not fooling anyone." His words echoed across the courtyard, drawing gasps from some spectators and groans from others. Parents ushered children away, shielding them from what they feared might become an ugly confrontation. Still, the guard didn't move. Not even when Alex mockingly saluted him with the American flag or pretended to march in place beside him. The lack of response was maddening for Alex, who had expected, at the very least, a glare or a sharp word in return. Instead, he was met with absolute indifference, as if his entire existence had been erased from the guard's awareness. The longer the standoff continued, the more Alex's confidence began to waver. At first, he had felt invincible, emboldened by the attention and laughter of those around him. But now, doubt crept into his mind. Was this really how he wanted to spend his afternoon in London? Waving a flag in someone's face just to prove a point that no one seemed to care about. A few members of the crowd started to lose interest, drifting away to explore other parts of the palace grounds. Others lingered, curious to see how long Alex would keep this up. Some even began to feel sorry for him, sensing that his bravado was masking deeper insecurities. After all, why would someone go to such lengths to provoke a stranger unless they were seeking validation, or perhaps trying to fill a void within themselves? Just as Alex was starting to reconsider his approach, a small voice broke through the murmurs of the crowd. Everyone turned to see a young girl, no older than 10, stepping forward with a tiny Union Jack flag clutched in her hand. Her eyes locked onto Alex's, and for the first time since the spectacle began, the energy shifted. What happened next would leave everyone, including Alex, utterly speechless. The little girl's sudden appearance brought an unexpected hush over the crowd. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old, with bright, curious eyes, and a determined expression that seemed far beyond her years. Clutching a small Union Jack flag in one hand, she walked straight toward Alex without hesitation. Her steps were steady, her gaze unwavering, as if she had made up her mind about something important. Alex froze mid-gesture, the American flag dangling limply from his hand. For the first time since he'd started his antics, he looked genuinely unsure of himself. The girl stopped just a few feet away, tilting her head slightly as she studied him. Then, in a clear, firm voice that carried over the murmurs of the crowd, she said, "Why are you being so mean? They're just doing their job." Her words hit like a thunderclap, cutting through the tension in the air. The crowd fell silent, every pair of eyes now fixed on the unlikely exchange between the brash tourist and the tiny figure standing before him. Parents instinctively pulled their children closer, while others leaned in, eager to hear what would happen next. Even the security officers paused, watching intently as the situation took an unexpected turn. For a moment, Alex didn't respond. His mouth opened and closed as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the right words. The smirk that had been plastered across his face for so long faltered, replaced by a look of confusion, and maybe even guilt. He glanced around at the crowd, searching for support or laughter, but found only stares filled with anticipation and judgment. I, I wasn't trying to be mean. Alex stammered finally, though his voice lacked its usual bravado. I was just having fun. You know, messing around. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out hollow, echoing awkwardly in the quiet courtyard. The girl didn't budge. If anything, her expression grew firmer. It doesn't look like fun to me, she replied, her tone calm but resolute. You're making people uncomfortable. And those guards, they're protecting us. They work hard. You shouldn't treat them like this. Her words struck a chord not just with Alex, but with everyone listening. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some nodding in agreement while others exchanged thoughtful glances. An elderly man nearby muttered, "That's right, young lady. Well said." A mother holding her toddler's hand whispered, "She's braver than most adults here." Alex shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of how foolish he must look. Here he was, a grown man, being called out by a child who barely reached his waist. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on him, or anyone else, yet there was no mockery in the girl's voice, no hint of condescension. She spoke with genuine conviction, as though she truly believed she could make him understand. "You don't even know what it's like to stand there all day," Alex mumbled defensively, though his argument sounded weak even to his own ears. "They don't do anything except stand there. They stand there for us." The girl shot back immediately, her voice rising slightly. "To keep us safe, to protect our country. My dad says it's a really important job, and we should respect them for it." Her mention of her father caught Alex off guard. He blinked, his shoulders slumping slightly as he processed her words. Respect. It was a concept he thought he understood, but in this moment, he realized he might have gotten it wrong. His actions hadn't been about respect. They'd been about attention, about proving a point that no one had asked him to prove. As the weight of the girl's words settled over him, Alex lowered the American flag slowly, almost reluctantly. The once boisterous energy that had fueled his behavior drained away, leaving behind a quiet uncertainty. The crowd, sensing the shift, began to relax as well. Some even smiled faintly, touched by the courage of the little girl who had dared to speak up when no one else would. But the story wasn't over yet. Something inside Alex had changed, something subtle but significant. And as he stood there, staring down at the girl with newfound respect, he knew he couldn't walk away without saying something. What happened next would leave the entire crowd in awe, and remind everyone present of the power of kindness and understanding. The silence that followed the girl's words felt heavy, as if the entire courtyard was holding its breath. Alex stood there, the American flag hanging loosely in his hand, his face a mix of shame and confusion. He had come to Buckingham Palace that day expecting to provoke reactions, to stir up controversy, but he hadn't anticipated being confronted by someone so small yet so powerful. The little girl's unwavering gaze held him in place, her innocence cutting through his defenses like nothing else could. "You're right," Alex finally said, his voice quieter than anyone had heard it all afternoon. "I'm sorry." The apology came out haltingly, each word weighed down by the realization of how far he'd gone. For a moment, no one moved. The crowd, which had been buzzing with tension just moments earlier, now seemed frozen, unsure whether to believe what they were hearing. Was this the same man who had been shouting insults and mocking tradition? The girl tilted her head slightly, studying him with an expression that was both curious and forgiving. "It's okay to make mistakes," she said softly, her tone softening. "But you should try to understand people before you judge them." Her words carried a wisdom that belied her age, and they landed squarely in Alex's chest, forcing him to confront the truth about his behavior. Without thinking, Alex knelt down until he was at eye level with the girl. The act itself was striking. The man who had strutted around arrogantly just minutes ago now humbled himself before a child. He extended the flag toward her, his hands trembling slightly. "Here," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're right. I don't deserve to hold this right now. Maybe you can teach me something about respect today." The girl hesitated for a brief second, then reached out and took the flag gently from his hands. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, some people nodding in approval while others wiped away tears. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. A symbolic passing of responsibility, a moment of reconciliation between two vastly different perspectives. As Alex rose back to his feet, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The hostility that had hung in the air dissolved, replaced by a sense of unity and shared humanity. People began applauding softly at first, then louder, until the sound filled the entire courtyard. Even the royal guard, who had remained stoic throughout the ordeal, gave the faintest nod, his lips curling upward into the tiniest hint of a smile. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it didn't go unnoticed. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Did you see that?" He smiled, prompting chuckles and nods of appreciation. Encouraged by the warmth of the moment, Alex turned to the girl and asked, "What's your name?" She beamed up at him, her earlier seriousness melting into a shy smile. "Emily," she replied. "And this is my family." She gestured to a group standing nearby, a middle-aged couple and a younger boy clutching a stuffed animal. Alex waved awkwardly, earning polite smiles in return. "Emily, thank you," Alex said sincerely. "You've taught me more in 5 minutes than I've learned in years." His words drew approving nods from the onlookers, many of whom were visibly moved by the transformation they'd witnessed. One woman dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, whispering to her companion, "That poor man needed that." We all did. With the tension fully diffused, Emily's parents stepped forward, offering Alex kind smiles. "Why don't you join us for a bit?" the mother suggested warmly. "We were just talking about the history of the palace. Maybe you'd like to hear some stories." Alex hesitated briefly, then nodded. "I'd like that," he said, surprising even himself. As he walked over to stand beside Emily and her family, the crowd began to disperse, satisfied that the situation had resolved itself peacefully. Cameras clicked one last time, capturing the unlikely bond that had formed between a brash American tourist and a brave little girl. Little did Alex know, this encounter would mark the beginning of a journey, not just through London's storied landmarks, but through his own understanding of culture, respect, and connection. And as he listened to Emily chatter excitedly about British traditions, he realized that sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest lessons. As Alex joined Emily and her family, the initial awkwardness of the situation began to melt away. The little girl, sensing his discomfort, took charge with the natural ease that only children possess. "Do you know why the guards wear those big hats?" she asked, pointing toward the nearest royal guard. Her question caught Alex off guard, not because it was complicated, but because it came from such a place of genuine curiosity. No, I don't," Alex admitted, scratching the back of his neck. He glanced at the towering bearskin hat atop the guard's head, feeling sheepish for the first time in years. All his earlier bluster about mocking tradition now seemed childish in comparison to Emily's thoughtful questions. Emily's father stepped in, smiling warmly. "Those hats are called bearskins," he explained. "They've been part of the uniform since the early 1800s. Soldiers wore them after winning battles against Napoleon's army. It's a symbol of pride and history." As he spoke, Alex found himself listening intently, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely wanted to understand. "And they never move," Emily chimed in excitedly. "Even if it rains or snows, they just stand there like superheroes." Her enthusiasm was infectious, drawing smiles from both her parents and Alex. For the first time that day, Alex felt included rather than judged. The weight of his earlier actions still lingered, but it was lighter now, softened by the kindness of strangers who chose to see him as more than his mistakes. The conversation shifted naturally to other topics: British history, cultural traditions, and even shared experiences between the U.S. and the UK. Alex discovered that Emily's dad had lived in America for several years before returning to the UK, giving him a unique perspective on both cultures. "It's funny how different we can seem on the surface," the man said, "but deep down, we're all just people trying to make sense of the world." Alex nodded thoughtfully, reflecting on his own journey. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, he'd often felt misunderstood, like he didn't quite fit in. That feeling had followed him into adulthood, manifesting in moments where he tried too hard to prove himself, even when it meant alienating others. Standing here now, surrounded by this warm, welcoming family, he realized how much he'd missed by focusing so much on being right instead of being kind. At one point, Emily tugged on Alex's sleeve, pulling him back into the moment. "Do you want to take a picture with us?" she asked brightly, holding up her tiny Union Jack flag alongside the American flag she'd accepted from him earlier. "We can show everyone that flags don't have to fight. They can be friends." Her words struck a chord with everyone present. Even the nearby tourists who had gathered earlier to watch the drama couldn't help but smile as Alex knelt beside Emily, posing for the photo. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Smile for peace," prompting laughter and applause. The Royal Guard, ever vigilant, finally broke protocol just enough to glance their way and perhaps offer another fleeting nod of approval. After the picture was taken, Alex turned to Emily's family. "Thank you," he said earnestly. "I came here today thinking I knew everything, but I didn't. You've shown me what real respect looks like." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the depth of his emotions. Emily's mom placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "We all make mistakes," she said gently. "What matters is what we do next." Feeling inspired, Alex decided to extend the olive branch further. Turning to the Royal Guard station nearby, he approached cautiously. "Excuse me," he said, loud enough to be heard over the murmurs of the crowd. "I owe you an apology too. I was disrespectful earlier, and I'm truly sorry." The guard, maintaining his disciplined stance, gave a single blink, a subtle acknowledgement of the gesture. This simple act of contrition resonated deeply with those watching. People clapped softly, moved by the sincerity of the moment. A teenage boy in the crowd whispered to his friend, "That guy just went from zero to hero." Others nodded in agreement, recognizing the courage it took for Alex to admit his faults publicly. By the time Alex rejoined Emily and her family, he felt lighter, as if a burden he hadn't even realized he carried had been lifted. They continued chatting, sharing stories and laughter, until the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting golden light across Buckingham Palace. What had started as a day filled with tension and misunderstanding had transformed into something beautiful, a reminder that connection and understanding can bridge even the widest divides. And as Alex walked away from the palace later that evening, he carried not just memories of London's landmarks, but also a renewed sense of purpose, to approach life with humility, openness, and a willingness to learn from anyone, regardless of age or background. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm orange glow over Buckingham Palace, Alex found himself immersed in a conversation that felt unlike any he'd ever had before. Emily and her family weren't just sharing facts about British history. They were inviting him into their world, offering glimpses of a culture steeped in tradition, but also full of warmth and humor. The more they talked, the more Alex realized how much he had misunderstood, not just about the royal guards, but about the people who cherished these traditions. At one point, Emily's dad pulled out his phone and showed Alex photos of past ceremonies at the palace, explaining the significance behind each event. "See this," he said, pointing to an image of soldiers marching in perfect formation. "This is the Trooping the Color ceremony. It's been happening for centuries. And it's not just about showing off uniforms. It's about unity. Everyone comes together to celebrate something bigger than themselves." Alex nodded slowly, absorbing the words. He thought back to his earlier antics, how he had dismissed the guards as mere symbols of outdated customs. But now, seeing the pride in Emily's eyes and hearing the passion in her father's voice, he understood that these rituals meant far more than he had given them credit for. They represented identity, resilience, and a shared sense of belonging. Emily, sensing Alex's growing interest, tugged on his sleeve again. "Do you want to see something cool?" she asked excitedly. Without waiting for an answer, she grabbed his hand and led him toward the edge of the courtyard, where a small plaque was embedded in the ground. "This is where King George VI used to stand during speeches," she explained proudly. "My grandpa told me all about it." Alex crouched down to get a better look, marveling at the tiny piece of history beneath his feet. For someone who had spent most of his life focused on the present, or even the future, he suddenly felt humbled by the weight of the past. These stones, these traditions, had stood the test of time, connecting generations across centuries. And here he was, standing on them with a child guiding him through their stories. The bond between Alex and Emily grew stronger with every passing moment. She introduced him to her younger brother, Liam, who shyly handed over his stuffed lion toy. "It's like the Lion of England," Liam mumbled, referring to one of the emblems of the British monarchy. Alex grinned, accepting the gesture graciously. "Thanks, buddy," he said, ruffling Liam's hair. "I'll take good care of him while I'm here." Their interaction drew smiles from the crowd, many of whom lingered nearby, captivated by the unlikely friendship forming before their eyes. Even the royal guards, though still maintaining their stoic positions, seemed to exude a quieter kind of approval. One tourist remarked to another, "Look at that. A few hours ago, he was causing trouble, and now he's making friends with kids. People really can change." As the evening wore on, Emily's mom suggested they take a group photo near the palace gates. "Let's remember this day forever," she said warmly, pulling out her camera. Alex agreed enthusiastically, positioning himself beside Emily and her family. Someone in the crowd volunteered to take the picture, capturing the moment when laughter and connection replaced tension and misunderstanding. But the surprises didn't end there. Just as the group was wrapping up their photo shoot, one of the royal guards finally broke protocol entirely. Stepping forward slightly, he offered a crisp salute, not just to Emily and her family, but to Alex as well. The gesture took everyone by surprise, including Alex, who blinked in disbelief. "Did he just?" he whispered, turning to Emily's dad for confirmation. "He did," the man replied, smiling broadly. "That's his way of saying thank you, for learning, for apologizing, and for respecting what we hold dear." Tears welled up in Alex's eyes as he returned the salute awkwardly but sincerely. The crowd erupted into applause once more, cheering for the guard's unexpected display of humanity. By the time Alex left the palace grounds that evening, he felt transformed. What had started as a misguided attempt to mock tradition had turned into a profound lesson in humility and cultural appreciation. Emily and her family had welcomed him with open arms, teaching him that respect wasn't about blindly following rules. It was about understanding the values behind them. And as he walked away, clutching the photo of their impromptu gathering, he knew he would carry those lessons with him for the rest of his life. By the time Alex left Buckingham Palace that evening, he was no longer the same man who had arrived hours earlier. The chaos and tension he had brought with him had dissolved into something far more meaningful, a connection forged through humility, understanding, and shared humanity. As he strolled through the streets of London, his mind replayed the events of the day. Each moment felt like a chapter in a story he never expected to be part of, one that would stay etched in his memory forever. The next morning, Alex decided to revisit some of the places Emily's family had mentioned during their conversation. Armed with newfound curiosity, he explored Westminster Abbey, marveling at its intricate architecture and rich history. He listened intently as tour guides recounted tales of kings, queens, and the countless lives intertwined with the Abbey's walls. For the first time, Alex didn't just see these landmarks as relics of the past. He saw them as living testaments to resilience, faith, and unity. Later, he visited the Churchill War Rooms, where he learned about Britain's struggles during World War II. The stories of sacrifice and determination struck a chord deep within him. He thought about how easy it was to dismiss traditions or symbols without truly understanding their significance, and how dangerous it could be to judge others based on surface-level impressions. By the end of the tour, Alex realized that respect wasn't just about appreciating differences. It was about recognizing the shared values that connected people across cultures. That afternoon, Alex returned to Buckingham Palace, hoping to find Emily and her family again. To his delight, they were there, standing near the gates and admiring the changing of the guard ceremony. When Emily spotted him, her face lit up with excitement. "You came back," she exclaimed, running over to greet him. Her enthusiasm warmed Alex's heart, reminding him of the simple joy of being accepted for who you are. Together, they watched the ceremony unfold, with Emily eagerly explaining each step to Alex. "This part is called the inspection," she whispered conspiratorially, pointing to the officer marching along the line of guards. "It makes sure everyone looks perfect." Alex chuckled softly, amazed by her knowledge and passion. Watching her interact with her family, he couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia for his own childhood, a time when life seemed simpler, before pride and insecurity clouded his perspective. As the ceremony concluded, Alex turned to Emily's parents. "I can't thank you enough," he said sincerely. "You've shown me so much, not just about your country, but about myself. I'll carry this with me wherever I go." Her mom smiled warmly, while her dad clapped him on the shoulder. "We're glad we could help," he replied. "But remember, learning doesn't stop here. Keep asking questions, keep listening, and you'll find there's always more to discover." Before leaving, Alex made a promise to himself and to Emily. "If I ever come back to London," he told her, "I'll bring my flag again. But next time, I'll wave it because I'm proud to share it with friends, not because I want to prove a point." Emily beamed at him, her tiny Union Jack flag fluttering gently in the breeze. "I'd like that," she said simply. As Alex walked away from the palace for the final time, he felt lighter, freer. The weight of arrogance and misunderstanding had been replaced by a sense of purpose. Back home, he began sharing his experiences with friends and family, recounting the lessons he'd learned in London. He spoke passionately about the importance of respecting traditions, even those we don't fully understand, and embracing opportunities to connect with others. Word of Alex's transformation spread quickly among his circle. Some teased him good-naturedly, calling him the reformed flag waver, while others expressed admiration for his willingness to grow. But what mattered most to Alex was knowing that he had changed for the better. And somewhere in England, a little girl smiled, knowing she had played a role in helping someone see the world through kinder, wiser eyes. Through every step of his journey, Alex carried the memory of that day at Buckingham Palace, a reminder that even in moments of conflict, there is always room for growth, forgiveness, and connection. Alex's journey didn't end when he boarded the plane back to the United States. In fact, it was only the beginning of a deeper transformation, one that would ripple outward, touching not just his own life, but the lives of those around him. As the miles passed beneath the aircraft, Alex sat by the window, staring out at the clouds while replaying the events of his trip in his mind. The image of Emily holding both the American and Union Jack flags stayed with him, a quiet reminder of how two seemingly opposing symbols could come together in harmony. Back home, Alex found himself looking at the world through new eyes. He started small, making an effort to listen more and speak less. At work, instead of dominating meetings with his opinions, he asked colleagues for their perspectives, especially those whose voices often went unheard. At family gatherings, he took the time to ask his grandmother about her childhood, a conversation that led to hours of shared stories and laughter. These moments might have seemed minor, but they added up, slowly reshaping the way Alex interacted with the people around him. One evening, while scrolling through social media, Alex came across a heated debate about cultural differences. Normally, he would have scrolled past or joined in with a sarcastic comment, but this time, something stopped him. Remembering Emily's words, You should try to understand people before you judge them. He typed a thoughtful response instead. He shared his experience at Buckingham Palace, emphasizing the importance of approaching disagreements with curiosity rather than hostility. To his surprise, his post went viral, sparking hundreds of comments from people who resonated with his message. Some thanked him for reminding them to be patient. Others admitted they had judged too quickly in the past. For Alex, it was validation that even one person's story could inspire change. Inspired by the response, Alex decided to take things further. He began documenting his travels, not just the sights he saw, but the lessons he learned along the way. His blog, titled Bridging Worlds, focused on fostering understanding between cultures. In it, he wrote candidly about his missteps, like the day he waved the American flag at Buckingham Palace, as well as the moments of connection that followed. Readers appreciated his honesty, and soon, his platform grew into a community where people shared their own stories of overcoming misunderstandings and building bridges. Months later, Alex received an email from a teacher in London. She explained that she had used his blog posts as part of a lesson plan for her students, encouraging them to think critically about respect, empathy, and cultural exchange. Enclosed with the email was a photo of her class holding handmade flags from various countries, each child smiling proudly. Seeing the picture brought tears to Alex's eyes. It was proof that his actions, both the mistakes and the growth, had made a tangible impact. Determined to keep giving back, Alex planned another trip to London. This time, he reached out to Emily's family beforehand, hoping to reconnect. When they met again outside Buckingham Palace, Emily ran up to him, clutching a framed drawing she had made. It showed the two of them standing side by side, holding their respective flags under a bright blue sky. "I told my teacher about you," she said proudly. "She said you're a good example of learning from your mistakes." Alex knelt down to hug her, overwhelmed by gratitude. "Thank you, Emily," he replied softly. "You taught me more than I ever imagined." Together, they spent the afternoon exploring the palace grounds, sharing stories and laughter with Emily's family. Even the royal guard seemed friendlier this time, offering subtle nods as if recognizing Alex as someone who had earned their respect. As the years went by, Alex continued to travel, write, and advocate for cross-cultural understanding. His journey became a testament to the power of humility and the ability to grow from even the most embarrassing moments. And though he never forgot the day he tried to provoke a royal guard, he cherished it as the catalyst for everything positive that followed. In the end, Alex realized that true strength wasn't about proving yourself right. It was about admitting when you were wrong and using that moment as a stepping stone toward becoming a better version of yourself. Through his experiences, he inspired countless others to do the same. And every time he looked at the framed drawing Emily had given him, the one now hanging proudly in his living room, he smiled, knowing that sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest lessons.